establish and possibly spread. A native species is a species, animal, plant, or any other organism within its natural range, including shifting its range without human involvement. But then there are alien species. So this is a species who has been transported beyond the natural barriers of its range due to human activities to a new region where it was not present before. A subset of these alien species then become established alien species. So they are able to establish in a new environment, reproduce, and have a self-sustaining population. And then eventually we have invasive alien species, yet another subset of the established alien species that spread and eventually show a net negative impact on biodiversity, local ecosystem, and other species. Biological invasions, the field, is quite a recently established field. It really kicked off in 1958 with the publishing of Charles Elton's book, The Ecology of Invasions by Animals and Plants. But biological invasions only really gained academic interest starting in the 1980s, 1990s, somewhere around that. But while the emergence of the field of invasion science is relatively recent, the emergence of biological invasions itself is not. Species interactions have been highly linked to human migration. So general human movement around the world, they have been moved for thousands of years, but initially their numbers and impacts remained low. But this changed through factors such as colonialism, technological advances. And then it wasn't until the end of the 19th century that biological invasions started to become much more abundant, and the numbers have continuously increased, the impacts became more obvious, and it's only going to continue in this trend. It has been estimated that by 2050, the number of first introductions will increase by 36%. But why do we care about this? Should we even care about this? Biological invasions are among the top 5 threats of global biodiversity, besides climate change, habitat loss and degradation, overexploitation, and pollution. So generally, yes, we should care. Biological invasions have also contributed to 60% of recorded global species extinctions. They have massive economic costs that quadruple every decade, and they can have a substantial impact on the good quality of life. I first started working in invasion science during my master's thesis in Iceland. So let me introduce you to my favorite fish that started it all, the European flounder. It's a flatfish species that is native to the coastal areas of Western Europe. It's generally considered a cotyledonous species. So it spawns in a marine habitat. The larvae then utilize selective currents to reach shallow estuarine waters, where they settle, metamorphose, and kind of grow up. But they can also move into the freshwater. So the flounder in Iceland currently is generally most abundant in estuarine habitats, but is often also found entering freshwater. It's actually the only flatfish in Europe that shows this behavior, so moving into freshwater. And besides this behavior, it can also be distinguished from other flatfish species by little spines along the dorsal and anal fin, as well as the middle line. Yeah, you can see a small picture of these spiny scales. The flounder diet includes everything from bivalves, polychaetes, crustaceans, and even small fish. It has previously been also introduced into other regions, such as the Great Lakes, but they did not establish. It was brought there via ballast water and some ships, but it has been sometimes observed, but not in great numbers and not established. In Iceland, however, the flounder was first officially documented in 1999 by the Marine and Freshwater Research Institute of Iceland, after it was caught in the southwest of Iceland at the mouth of one of the. A year later, it was also found in the southeast near the town of Höfn. From there, it spread rapidly around the country. It's now almost found everywhere. It's, again, most abundant in estuaries, but it often goes up into the rivers where it co-occurs with very highly valuable salmon species, Atlantic salmon, brown trout, Arctic char. Before I started my PhD, there have been only some small-scale studies on the flounder, including my own master thesis, but there really wasn't that much data available. But because the flounder moves up into the river and overlaps with these salmonid species, the recreational angling community in Iceland has been considered one of the very important stakeholder groups in this case. And from the first years of introduction or observations of flounder in Iceland, it received quite some media attention. You can see here some examples in the picture. It kind of died down, but then in recent years, my research rather, contributed to some more media coverage. My research was covered in some national newspapers. I had the opportunity to present it on TV and even attempt to cook a flounder. I was quite active on social media, communicating my research, especially to the recreational fishing community. And I even went on a fly fishing podcast to talk about flounder. But much like my geographic location, my research focus and interest changed over time. My research first started off very ecologically with my master thesis. Here I looked at the ecological overlap and potential competition with a native flatfish species, the European plaice. Ended up being published in this paper that you can see here. But throughout the time of my thesis, I encountered a lot of people who knew about the flounder. You know how it goes. You meet some people, you talk about who you are, what you do for work, and often when I mentioned my thesis topic, people would tell me all about their experience with the flounder, their opinions, where they've seen it. So I became really curious about this kind of knowledge and how we can integrate that, especially in circumstances where we don't have much data or not as much resources as we would like to collect more. So when I started my PhD in October 2019, I was integrating this somehow into my research. The plan originally was a very ecologically rooted PhD, but I pushed for doing a little survey to collect information on perceptions and knowledge among the recreational fishermen in Iceland. And that's kind of how it all began, what I like to call the slippery slope of social science. What was first intended as only a little side quest evolved into quite a heavy focus of my PhD on interdisciplinary approaches, involving stakeholders and generally looking into the human dimensions of biological invasions. Why should we care about the human dimensions? Long story short, we are part of the problem. Biological invasions are inherently linked to humans, to us. We are the ones driving the species interactions, whether we accidentally introduce them or intentionally, we can buy them, anything. We are in many cases observing the impacts that these species can inflict, whether it's on us and ourselves, on our health, on the ecosystem. But we are also the ones that hold the ability to do something about it, to address this. And while biological invasions have for a long time been mostly addressed from just a biological, ecological perspective, the field of invasion science has expanded a lot and is becoming more and more interdisciplinary. And the human dimensions are increasingly being addressed, which is an exciting development. And alongside the diversification of the research topics within the field, the array of methodologies and approaches to address this has evolved and greatly expanded. For example, through my research, I came across and eventually integrated to newly emerging establishing fields of conservation culturomics and eye ecology. Both of these fields are harnessing web-based, digitally stored data that was generated for other purposes, so not for research. While conservation culturomics on the one hand is exploring how the human-nature interaction is manifested in this data, ecology is more focusing on ecological patterns that emerge from this data. So in my PhD, four different papers, projects. I'm going to introduce you to two of them where I used both conservation culturomics and ecology. The first one, Let's Talk Aliens. In this project that was published last year, I wanted to look at how the flounder is perceived by an important stakeholder group. So again, the recreation angling community. So for this purpose, I conducted an anonymous online survey targeting this stakeholder group. It was administered in October 2019 for about 8 months. And the survey centered around a like it style question, where I asked participants to rate their agreement to 4 statements. Do you think the flounder could be an important recreational species? Does the flounder impact your angling experience negatively? Does it have a negative impact on native species? And do you consider it a pest? The answers ranged from strongly disagree in this orange-brown over here to strongly agree in this dark green. And what can I say? The flounder is not very much liked in Iceland. But it's, yeah, participants did not think at all that this species could have a recreational value, but stated that they found it negatively influences their experiences, influences other species, and overall see it as a pest. This was not really a surprise if you consider that for recreational fishermen, this is what Instagram basically looks like. They pay a lot of money to go to get angling permits, to go and catch some great salmon, trout, or char that they can hold into the camera. When you end up with an ugly looking flatfish on your hook, I understand that you're not quite that happy. But I was wondering whether this negative perception was driven by the species itself or by the fact that it's new to the system here. So in 2021, I conducted a very similar survey targeting recreational angling communities throughout the flounder's native range. So in countries like Germany, Norway, Denmark, Sweden. And I think you can already see it very clearly. The results pretty much flipped. So in its native range, the flounder is perceived as a highly valuable recreational species. People go out specifically to catch the flounder, and really appreciate it for its high abundance in shallow waters where it's accessible and easy to catch. It's also very ready to take the bait. So people were actually quite confused about why I'm asking about seeing the flounder as a pest. So yeah, it's perceived highly positive in its native range. But then in 2023, as part of a different project, I conducted yet another online survey. I targeted again the recreational community in Iceland, and part of it was the same like it style question. And while you can see that the same overall patterns in the results still remain, statistical tests show that there was a significant difference between the years. So overall, we see quite strong fluctuations in stakeholder perceptions towards the flounder, whether it's between native and invaded countries, but even more surprising, within Iceland over time. So then I went further down the rabbit hole and I became interested in how the species has been talked about in Iceland. So I went ahead and extracted all available data, newspaper articles that either were about the flounder or just mentioned it. I also extracted conversations from a Facebook group that was very popular among the recreational angling community in Iceland. Here, or in Iceland, about 60% of the population still use Facebook, so it's very popular. Sorry. I analyzed this data first quantitatively, which showed that newspapers actually reported quite often in the beginning, but strongly decreased in later years. But I also looked at them qualitatively. I manually extracted all the text data and pre-processed it because I wanted to check whether the data collected using this conservation culturomic approach, whether it would provide similar perceptions as those indicated in the online survey. At first, I conducted a topic analysis, where in the first step, this analysis kind of takes all the text data, puts it in one big bowl, basically, and it identifies a number of topics based on the frequencies in which certain words are occurring close together with other terms. Then it takes these identified topics and scans the different corpora. So, for instance, all the newspapers between 1999 and 2013, or however you divide it. And then it scans how frequent these topics come up within this time frame. For my data, we identified 3 topics: the arrival and spread of European flounder in pink, the general monitoring and surveying in green, and flounder in recreation angling in blue. Now, if we look at the frequency of this, we can see that in the newspaper articles, the focus shifts over time. In the beginning, until 2013, the focus was very much on its arrival in Iceland and the initial spread. Between 2013 and October 2019, when I first started my thesis, the flounder kind of takes a backseat. But then since October 2019, the focus is back to the European flounder, but this time in recreational angling. And unsurprisingly, the focus among the Facebook conversations was mostly on flounder in recreational angling. But given that the Facebook group was about this, it's not a surprise. I also conducted a frequency analysis of which words were mostly mentioned in context with the flounder in each source per time. And here is what I want to highlight is that the terms are mostly rather neutral toned. And then another step on this, I looked at Wikipedia page views to explore the public interest in this species and how this fluctuates over time. Wikipedia page views provides you with a total number of visitors of the, in this case, Icelandic Wikipedia page for European flounder. And you can see here, if you follow the red line, it shifts here and there, shows some quite big peaks. And I was curious about these short-term peaks and whether we can identify potential drivers. Because if we know what can trigger the public's interest, we can use this kind of knowledge when designing future outreach and awareness campaigns or similar. In my case, we had some increasing numbers related to the newspaper articles, to the TV coverage, but then we have this massive peak in December 2021. And the only thing I could identify was flounder was talked about, mentioned in a fly fishing podcast. Sorry. And the second paper. Have you seen this fish? It was published earlier this year. Here we aim to look at how the great knowledge established among stakeholders can benefit the monitoring activities of alien species, and how kind of different data sources can be incorporated with the goal of improving monitoring data to kind of counteract biases that occur with each data source. And as I mentioned before, to address biological invasions, we need data. But in my case, there was a big lack of data and overall monitoring activities to this day still remain quite underdeveloped. And this is often driven by a mismatch between the resources that are available to what is or the resources that are needed to what compared to what is available to institutions to do so. But to counteract this, information can and have been increasingly used along with collaborations with the public or specific stakeholder groups. It's becoming more and more common. People can get involved on all kinds of levels of the research process under the assumption that they possess valuable knowledge, experiential knowledge, and are willing to learn new skills or contribute. Local ecological knowledge is generally defined as the knowledge that has established within a species specific group of people over time throughout either interactions with the local environment or the utilization of local resources. At a minimum, when working with local ecological knowledge, it entails the incorporation of stakeholder observations. But ideally, people should be involved throughout the entire project so that the knowledge and ideas can be incorporated throughout the entire process. But in this study, we aim to contrast occurrence data of flounder in Iceland based on stakeholder knowledge to data from monitoring research programs from the Marine and Freshwater Institute in Iceland. Overall, to evaluate whether stakeholder observations can be a contributing source of information. Yeah, in total, we had 6 different sources of data. The first 2, you can see them here, stem from my project. First, in the online survey that I mentioned earlier that I conducted in 2019. I also asked participants of places where they've encountered flounder in Iceland, whether they've seen it or caught it. And then I also used the data I extracted from Facebook using the ecology approach of locations that have been named in the context of flounder observations. In both approaches, we checked the locations and only included those place names or those locations that we could clearly and confidently identify, which isn't often easy in Iceland because every other river is basically called Salmon River. So we had to be creative at some point. And as this data did not come with specific coordinates, we manually chose representative coordinates closest to the river mouth or the river entrance into the lake. And as we were looking at the spread of flounder around the country and not within the river, we deemed this suitable, and it was done under the assumption that this is the minimum spread of the flounder within the river or lake. We then also received flounder occurrence data from 4 different databases of the Marine Freshwater Institute. 2 of these sources are also based on stakeholder observations. On the one hand, it's logbooks. So in Iceland, by law, recreational anglers are required to log their catches of salmonids. They're not obliged to report flounder, but a lot of them still do. And then there is the so-called Rare Fish Project, which collects data or sightings of rare and unusual fish, which are submitted by the public, mostly commercial fishermen. The flounder was documented as part of the Rare Fish Project until about 2006, when the European flounder became more abundant and eventually was moved to the general monitoring, especially in the marine, where it was then logged instead of logging it under the Rare Fish Program. For the locations stemming from the logbooks, we manually determined representative coordinates similar to the approach earlier, but the rare fish data came with specific coordinates. And then finally, we also received data from research projects and surveying activities conducted both in the marine and freshwater habitats. So this is the outcome. We have a map here with all the data points that we collected. The colors remain the same for the sources that I introduced. Additionally, I marked here 11 sites. We say based on the locations provided by the participants in the online survey, we chose 3 representative sites in each quadrant of Iceland and sampled there using a beach stain. And in 11 out of these 12 sites, we caught at least 1 European flounder. The one site where we didn't catch it was in the northeast, and given the spread patterns that we knew back then and also know now, it was likely still too rare, too low abundancy, that we likely just didn't catch it at that point. But with 11 out of 12 sites, we were able to validate these sites mentioned in the survey. I know it's a lot of dots and colors, but with this graph, what I want to say is not that either of the approaches or sources is better than the other. They all come with their advantages and their biases, but combining them, we get quite a good view, quite a good picture of the flounder distribution in Iceland. And I would also like to highlight here that if we look at the data collected from the online survey, which is in yellow, and from the ecology approach in purple, that even though it's at a lower quantity, the ecology data reflects quite well the survey data. Indeed, it was about 80% of the locations overlapped between approaches. Then we took it a step further and looked at what the available data can tell us about the spread of flounder following its first introduction of official documentation. For this, we used the 4 sources, databases from the Marine Freshwater Institute, as these came with temporal information. We looked at the spread in 5-year increments, and this allowed us to get an idea of how the spread developed. Something I want to highlight here is that if you look at the top left map, we can see that the stakeholder observation-based data stemming from the rarefish data based until 2000. That this data by 2003 already shows quite a long distribution from the West Fjords all the way in the northwest of Iceland, along the south coast to the southeast of Iceland. In the actual monitoring data of marine sites and even some of the freshwater sites, it did not pop up until much later. Overall, the data has quite a heavy focus on the southwest of Iceland, but eventually the flounder was documented in all 4 quadrants. So we can basically, looking at the spread data and the currents around Iceland, it has mostly spread clockwise around the country and at a slower pace. Also, it has been creeping up on the east coast in a northwards trend. Yeah, so we compared these different data sources on European flounder occurrence, and I think it's safe to say that, at least in the case of European flounder here in Iceland, integrating stakeholder knowledge, whether it's based on data like the survey or harnessing social media data, or is already part of existing structures, offers a fantastic opportunity to look at the spread of an alien species. So our result, or our conclusion, basically was to recommend to build upon these existing structures and improve the situation, improve the ability that we can include this data. So, a very long story short, the overarching conclusion of my PhD was that in order to better understand biological invasions, interdisciplinary approaches are needed, should be developed that incorporate different views, perceptions, and approaches. Yeah, I defended this PhD in January, and while I moved to another country and job, I have not fully left Iceland and overall fish behind. Together with some other PhD students, we co-developed a science communication platform about fish research in Iceland. We launched it about 1.5 years ago, and the goal of ice fish research is to make fish research more accessible to the public, facilitate communication, and get early career scientists involved. We introduce scientists, cover publications, and most recently have also published the first season of our podcast, Fiskasbjörn. We are also very active on social media, so if you want to follow us, find us on Instagram, Facebook, or Blue Sky, check out our website, or if you want to get involved, get in touch with us. Yeah, as I mentioned before, I moved to Spain in September last year and started a postdoc position at the Estación Experimental de Zónas Aridas. And here I'm part of the IRIS working group, the Interdisciplinary Research in Invasion Science. And here we aim to explore the interplay between the environment and human dimensions of plant invasions, mostly plant invasions, at least. We are also quite active on social media and have our website. So if you want to find out more, check that out. But starting at IRIS, I'm moving into a whole new climatic region for myself, but also shifting my research focus from one specific fish to a general focus on plants, as well as increasing the scale at which I work at to a more global approach. This has come with quite some steep learning curves, but I got involved in many exciting projects looking at the human dimensions of invasions. And as you probably all know, it is sometimes difficult to say no to getting involved in exciting projects. So I can't introduce all of them here, but I'm gonna tell you about one quickly before I run out of time. One of the projects that I'm currently working on is using conservation culturomics to look at public interest in species or invasive alien species that are listed on the Union list of concern. So we're looking in for each of the EU countries and how these species, or like how the public interest is towards these species. One of the culturomic approaches is to look at search queries on Google for specific topics, such as a specific species. For this project, we acquired these search query data for all the 88 species for each EU country between 2016 and 2022. This data doesn't give you exact counts, but more of like a tendency, general trends. And this data can then be used to approximate public interest. Such approaches have been not only used for ecological purposes, but also in many other fields, for instance, health-related fields. You can imagine if in a region suddenly the searches for flu symptoms shoot up, it is very likely that in the region there are a lot of cases of flu. So under the same principle, we are working with it. In this project, we used the data to look at public interest in the species listed on the Union Concern List. This list was first adopted in 2016. It has been frequently updated. In 2022, the third update was published that included 88 species. Just recently, this year, the fourth update was adopted, including 114 species. And so we used the list from 2022 and collected for all the 88 species data from between 2016 and 2022. In the first step, I went and identified the top 10 species that were most searched for among the 88 species and across all the EU countries. And here are some of them. We have the raccoon dog, the nutria, all very kind of fluffy looking. We have plants such as the giant hogweed and the Himalayan balsam, but we also have insects like the Asian hornet. We are then looking at the overall development of these of the public interest of the search queries for each species. The ones in color are representing the top 10 species, and then for each country. And you can see that the data is showing quite some peaks. So then we went ahead for looking for in each country for these top 10 species, identifying the top 10 peaks and whether these were anomalies. Sorry for that. And now I'm in the process of looking at these specific peaks and trying to find out what might have triggered it. I'm looking into newspaper articles in these countries and generally anything. We have cases where, for instance, the Asian hornet, there was a peak in Austria in one specific time, and that was right after the the first observation was made and publicly available. There was a lot of media coverage around it. So again, people went and searched for it. We have also some curious results, for instance, for the raccoon. It often peaks across multiple countries at the end of the year. So likely around times when it's getting warm, around Christmas, people are home, or the home is empty and the raccoons move in. So I'm very excited to look more into this, but I hope I will be able to give you an update at some point. But for now, I would like to say thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Theresa. That was a really great talk. Yeah, we have some time to have some questions. If anybody, I'll ask people in the room first. Yeah, I don't know. I think it might be best to come up. Yeah, that's right.
Hey, great talk. Thanks for giving it. Learned a lot. I was wondering if you looked at any scientific evidence on whether or not the flounder is looking or affecting some of the target species that the stakeholders are interested in, and maybe that's why, or one of the factors why they have a negative response towards the flounder.
That's a very good question. So there is some data, some indications of impact of the flounder. There are some local studies looking at the overlap of flounder with salmon, for instance, and they overlap in the diet. And the flounder additionally also predates on the salmon. Same for my master thesis, where I looked at the overlap with the native flatfish species. So there are indications of competition and direct predation, but scientifically, we don't have enough data to actually say what the impact is and how much. But despite that, in the 7 years I was working with the species, I kept meeting a very persistent belief among the recreation community that the flounder eats the eggs of the salmon.
Right.
We don't have any proof, but it's a very persistent thought. So I can't say whether it's true or not because we just don't know, but that is one of the things probably driving the negative perception.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Great answer.
Anybody else have a question? I had a quick question just kind of about the surveys and how you saw that change within Iceland over the years. Was there any difference in the demography of the survey, it was a volunteer survey? Was there any changes in that, or was it pretty consistent between the years as well? Like kind of same people doing the survey?
One of the things I regret, I went into this whole survey world very, I don't know, without much knowledge of social science approaches. I was very lucky how it all worked out, but one of the things I would have liked to change would have been more demographic questions. I did in the second survey, in the 2023 one, I added a question of whether they've participated in the previous survey. We did have, I think, about 60% that indicated that they took part. I think another 10-15% that said they possibly took part, but they weren't sure. So I think there was quite an overlap because it's also, as you know, a small community in Iceland. It was spread mostly via social media, so I think there was a high overlap.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Thank you. I had one more question if there's no one else. I was wondering for kind of the outputs after you're looking into these culturomics and like eye ecology, when you're looking at these like spikes and seeing what's driving this increase in interest for different invasive species, like what are the kind of the outcomes? Because I think you said earlier in your talk, maybe it would be more targeted education or like finding how is that kind of what the output would be? It's to just be aware of what resources to be putting educational things through, or like is
On
it
the one
just
hand,
stopping them, like the invasions from spreading, or is it just more for monitoring? Yeah.
kind of a bit of everything. So on the one hand, we kind of want to identify whether there are certain, I don't know, charismatic traits or something that make some species more, I don't know, search for than others. Whether it's, I know, a fluffy raccoon, or being kind of very diverse views on, oh my god, it's so cute, and oh my god, please take it away from here. But then could also be health impacts, like I've seen with, there's on the top 10 list, there's the tree of heaven, which also causes a lot of pollen allergies. So kind of identifying these traits, but also by knowing this, we can identify, hopefully, how we can target specific stakeholder groups, specifically the public, on raising awareness, on management strategies, things like that.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have. That was a really great talk and very interesting, and I think kind of different than what a lot of us do here at least the Marine Institute. So it was great to get just learn about your projects that you previously worked on, and what's going to be coming along for you as well. So excited to hear about that. Yeah, ice fish is really cool if you just want to learn about research on fish in Iceland. And they're really nice as well. Yeah.
Charlotte has been covered as well.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely, if you're interested, reach out. We're always happy to collaborate or cover even beyond Iceland.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Theresa. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect.
All right.